Hey everyone, I'm Ian.
And I'm Sam.
And you're listening to Do I Like This, the podcast.
Yay!
This week we lined up another week of giving Sam a little break for being pregnant and all.
Yep.
This week I had a bucket list item for me to check off. I got to interview Paul Bales. He's the COO of the Asylum, which if you listen to our podcast, you know this is my favorite production company out there.
Yeah, they make all of Ian's favorite terrible, wonderful movies. They also are the ones behind Sharknado.
A little film you might have heard of.
Yeah, the Sharknados.
5 little films you might have heard
of. They did Bloody Bill, which was our first episode. Really bad audio quality, but that movie.
We'll go back and revisit that now that we know how to do audio and such.
I was not available for this one, which I was actually really disappointed about. I was upstairs not feeling well, really jealous of Ian having a blast. So hopefully you guys enjoyed as much as he did.
Yeah, I had a real great time doing this. Paul's an awesome guy. Take a listen. We hope you enjoy. So you joined Asylum around 2006.
Yep.
How did you get started with this company that's really kind of made a role?
Well, I was not one of the founding members. However, I have known David Ramawi, who is one of the founding partners, since we were 8 years old. His grandmother lived across the street from my house, and we met one day. He was dressed like an Indian. I was dressed like a construction worker. And so it just worked out perfectly that we would become friends.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we moved out here to Hollywood, to pursue the movie business.
Mm-hmm.
I went off in another direction for a while. And David Latt, who we've known since college, and David Ramawi started the Asylum. It will be the 25th year next year. They had a third partner who got sick of making crappy movies, and she decided to leave and do something else. And David, to their great credit, because they like to spend money and I don't, asked me to join them. And so, yeah, in 2006, I came on board, even though I'd known them forever. Mm-hmm. And started with a company and haven't looked back since.
And before this, I saw you were at Universal doing talent work.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem. One of the problems with Hollywood is you get all these great jobs that you really love, and it takes you away from what you originally thought. My goal was always to work in movies. But, I started working at Universal. I was actually a tour guide first, which was the best job I've ever had. You just talk about movies all day. It's what you're doing now.
You probably got paid the same.
I think so. I think minimum wage was $3 then. Yeah. But, I guess they liked what I did. So they kept promoting me. And eventually I was hiring all of the actors for their theme parks.
Oh, wow.
Here in Los Angeles and then in Florida. They downsized and laid me off, and I had a midlife crisis of what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And I started working for a labor union that represented the performers at Universal. Did that for a little while, and then I saw that SAG was looking for representatives. So I went to the Screen Actors Guild and worked as a representative for a couple of years. And then they asked me to run their independent program for independent producers. It's called SAG Indie. And it was great because I got to, work with filmmakers and with actors and try to get them together and work together. And I did that for almost 5 years. But I just saw, I thought, I've done this now. I want to do something else. And so when Sherry, the other partner at the Asylum, left, I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to finally move back into what I moved out here to do in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's been great. You work with your friends. And you have fun making shitty movies.
That's awesome.
Can I say shitty on your iPad?
You can say, oh, believe me, I'm a sophisticated sailor, as I kind of describe our podcast. You could say almost anything.
Oh, good.
One of the, I'm envious because I've always joked with Sam, I love terrible movies. And I was like, my dream is to be in like Megalodon of the Dead or write these terrible kind of ideas of films, and she always jokes. She's like, you come up with great titles and great first paragraphs and then you forget the whole story. And I'm like, yes.
Well, all we need is the title in the first paragraph. And that's
hey, yeah, that's true. Megalodon of the Dead is yours. May it be yours. So yeah, and we joke on this podcast, sometimes we'll say, oh, shitty or terrible movies. And sometimes they are. So as I mentioned, Death Ballet, Revenge of Bloody Bill, Beast of Bray Road, there were some very early ones where it was, we've had Tom Downey on a couple times. He's one of our favorite guests.
Great.
And you saw early on in Asylum. So when I first started getting to your films, when I was probably in high school, and I would go to Blockbuster, and they had like the buy 4 of our DVDs that we're trying to get rid of for $20.
Yeah.
And I love horror movies, B movie. I would buy them all. So that's kind of how I first stumbled into you guys as a company early on. And I genuinely say this, my favorite movie company, because you guys just make films and they're fun.
Yeah.
So they kind of evolved from early on. It was a lot more of like original, not that they aren't original, but like original concepts, Death Valley. And then it got into Transmorphers, and then Sharknado hit, and it's evolved into where there's some great parody. There's great mockumentary kind of styles. Could you tell me a little bit like how you guys evolved into like that space where you guys really became the first to invent this genre?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things about our company, and really independents in general, is we always have to reinvent ourselves because the market changes. And, you mentioned, Blockbuster Video, which at the beginning of the time of the Asylum, that was where 90% of our revenue came from.
Oh, wow.
And, when Blockbuster and Hollywood Video went out of business, that was, a real turning point for us. But the Asylum's philosophy has always been to pursue and do what the buyers of the product want. Mm-hmm. And at the time when we first started off making films, it was horror. Mm-hmm. And we would go to Blockbuster. We'd go down to Dallas every month and kiss the ring. And they'd tell us, we need horror films. And so for a while, we were almost exclusively doing horror movies. And then a few years later, they came to us and they said, well, Lionsgate is really getting into this horror stuff and they have bigger budgets. You should probably do something else. So start doing science fiction. And so, we started to do more science fiction stuff. And it was interesting because one of the first ones was War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
David Latt had always loved the novel and he had wanted to adapt it into a movie. This was before I was with the company, but of course I know the story. And he was well in the way of developing that movie. And then we found out about the Tom Cruise version. And so we went out to Dallas and they said, should we still make this? And they said, yes, absolutely. It's going to be great. Blockbuster's only request was that we were sure that the title was in the public domain. Mm-hmm. And we were. So they said, okay, do it. We'll defend you. And they got some calls from Warner Brothers.
Oh, I'd imagine.
But, it went out. And I would say, adjusted for today's dollars, War of the Worlds was probably our biggest hit until Sharknado.
I remember the Entertainment Weekly article talking about it. And I was like, I know the Asylum, and it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal. It was a huge success. And so that's sort of how the mockbuster business started. And we love to give credit where it's due. The New York Post, the great New York Post, actually created the term mockbuster in describing our movies. I think they were talking about Snakes on a Train at that time.
Yes.
And we just, we embraced it because it was a great way to get the movies out there with awareness about the subject matter. Mm-hmm. Because you've seen these crappy things. It's not like we find the studio script and make that. We just take the concept and say, well, what would we do with The Day the Earth Stopped or Transmorphers? And, in some ways, it's amazing how similar they are. And in other ways, it's amazing how different they are.
It was interesting. We talked with Lee Scott, and he was talking about Transmorphers and how it's such more of an intimate film because obviously you guys didn't have the budget that whoever made them, Michael Bay and those. Yeah. But it was... I think in some ways it was a much better character film. The budget wasn't ever going to be there. So it's really interesting kind of learning that. I think a lot of people assume you guys go, all right, whatever they do, watch it, knock it off. It's not what you guys do.
Absolutely. It's not. There is an industry term that's not mockbuster for what we do. It's called drafting. And it comes from the racing term where, you use the speed of the person in front of you to,
You hide in the air bubble, yeah.
Exactly. And this term has been used in Hollywood for years and years and years. And it's the example I always love to use is when the Da Vinci Code came out. Mm-hmm. Every television station, all of the reality shows, did Da Vinci have a code? What was the Da Vinci Code? What was it really like? And it's the same thing. It's using the awareness people have of something that's in the zeitgeist and, taking advantage of that.
I think it goes back in all creative arts. You just think of, I'm a musician on my spare life, and you hear a chord progression in, one song, you hear it in 800 different songs in a slight different variation. It's not anything but going, okay, here's an artistic format in which we can work. And now here's how we took that.
Yeah, exactly. And we still do mockbusters to this day because they still work. Although we do them less frequently, mostly because the studios are making such terrible films.
Well, there's that. So what do you think? I was going to say, besides the studios, as you've kind of evolved back into, an episode we did Aquarium of the Dead, which was the third film in the Zombies trilogy, which I hope continues to be more than a trilogy. You should go for the Star Wars, just a whole franchise of it. So you've kind of evolved again into almost full circle back to a lot more original content that isn't just the mockbusters. Was there something that kind of shifted back into that? Or is it just your growth as a studio has enabled you to take on more to produce to these numbers?
It's a combination of a lot of things. I think part of it is Sharknado, which, was an original concept. And so that definitely opened the door for, just outrageous titles that don't necessarily have to be tied to anything else. And just trying different things. I mean, you're very familiar with our creature and outrageous oeuvre, but we also make films for the Lifetime channel, and we did a Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
And so we just want to make movies and do them wherever we can. And it's cyclical. There are times where, the platforms that we sell to, well, here's a funny story, one that I like. Some of my favorite movies that the Asylum have made have been our sexy comedies, like 18-Year-Old Virgin and Sexbot and MILF and all of these. And
was it Clickbait or something? No,
Jailbait.
Jailbait, yes.
Clickbait would be the modern version.
Yeah, right.
But I really like those movies because I think they're fun and they're sexy, and because I'm in charge of the finances for the company, I like them because they're cheap to make. And what's funny is that on the platforms that still show them, there's some of the top performers. I mean, they make tons of money. But the problem is that some of these platforms, and I won't mention any names because they're our customers, they don't want to be associated with the dirty stuff. It's sort of like how OnlyFans has, had to go back on its, say, we don't want to be associated with porn.
Even though that's our core revenue generator.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of frustrating when curation like that comes in, but we're at the mercy of the customers in that case. It's really funny when the video stores disappeared, we really wondered, where is this audience going to go? And we learned really quickly that they went to video on demand. In the early days of video on demand, and video on demand in this case was really just what you'd get on your cable box.
Oh, I remember those days when you're like, what do we have on Spectrum cable on demand channels now? We didn't have Netflix. We didn't have all these choices.
Exactly. And we discovered right away that that's where the audience went. And we were making as much money on VOD as we were at Blockbuster Video when they went out of business.
That's awesome.
And what was great is at the time, it was the Wild West. They didn't curate at all. They just listed titles alphabetically. And they have actually done research that Americans are so lazy that they won't go past the letter L.
That sounds about right.
So we just started titling our movies with numbers or A's or B's or C's. And so you'll find that, probably 60% of our titles appear before the letter L because that's just how we title them. And people would just, Aquarium of the Dead, that sounds good. And,
Perfect.
They'll click on that. And that worked for a while. And unfortunately, they, the platforms got a little smarter, or they got pressure from the studios and saying, well, you can't do that. We can't, 2010 Moby Dick can't be beating a Mission Impossible. And so they started curating, and it becomes where you get the placement, new and noteworthy, in theaters now. This is something we think you'll like.
The curated lists of like, oh, here's the sci-fi curated list.
Really. And, we've had to adjust to that as well. And, it's kind of frustrating because going back to the days of Hollywood Blockbuster, you're going to make me cry.
I know, I'm feeling these emotions like I miss going to the video store.
Me too, because, and I've said this before, that none of these electronic platforms, even though they ostensibly have unlimited bandwidth, have ever been able to recreate the experience of the new release wall. Everybody would just go in and they'd walk around and they'd see the studio movies and they'd see our movies and they'd pick something. And then if they still didn't find anything, they could go into the middle of the store and every movie was available.
And there's no experience of it might be out, getting the last copy or missing it. You can get whatever you want. There isn't that allure of, I have to wait till next week. So the movie builds in your anticipation.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, going back to the laziness of Americans in particular, they just won't go past maybe one or two lines of looking at movies. And so the trick is really, how do you get your movie seen? And so one of the things that we've been doing is, and it's not inexpensive, we're doing theatrical releases. Granted, it's 10 theaters in 10 little markets, but it's just one of the things you have to do to get seen. But the real star right now, and again, it's part of the Wild West, is AVOD platforms like Pluto and Tubi TV.
Oh man, I think we do half of our episodes because of the availability and the breadth of content there.
Absolutely, and we're, knock on wood, doing fantastic.
That's awesome.
Platforms, because we have our channels. We have the Asylum channel, and if you know that that's the type of content that you like, you can find it and you can watch it all day for free.
It's interesting because I come from the perspective, and I know I'm a unique viewer. I'm your target audience in a lot of ways. The name The Asylum to me is a positive thing. Talking with Tom, talking with Lee, being open, my eyes are open to the world. I understand that it's not to everyone. Yeah. How have you guys kind of, I've really respected how you guys kind of go, that's who we are. We don't care what you think about us. But you've mentioned a little bit, what has been some of the challenge, be it casting, be it talked a little about getting your film out there, of being known as The Asylum?
Sure. It's changed, but I will tell a kind of a fun story. It's not as directly related to your question about The Asylum. But, when we developed Sharknado, we always knew that it was going to be called Sharknado. But, we thought that might scare people off. And so we sent the script around as Dark Skies. And all of the actors, they'll say this too, probably halfway through shooting, it was revealed to them that the film would be called Sharknado, and they were just upset. They were, you've got to take my name off of it. I'm not going to be associated with anything that is called Sharknado. And of course, they've all changed their mind. But it's sometimes been a challenge, being The Asylum. But really, I think mostly the challenge has been that we were just seen as a horror company for so long. But one of the things that's most interesting, and the partners and I talk about this all the time, is it has gone in a cycle. When we first started off and when we first started making our low-budget horror movies and then moved into the mockbusters, it was cool to hate The Asylum. And we would hear the, stuff. I, at the time, our website, we had a blog. I don't know if you remember what those were.
Oh, I'm pushing 40. I got you.
But I would be the person that would, moderate the blog and get all of the comments and everything like that. And I mean, I'm not lying. I received emails that said, I hope you and your family die in a fire.
Humans are the best, aren't they?
They really are great. But something happened over the years, probably around Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, where it really switched. And it kind of became cool to like The Asylum.
Yeah.
Because I think people like you, cool.
Debatable.
And people just realized they were in on the joke.
Yeah.
And it's not a joke like, we're making parody films like, a scary movie type of thing. It's just that, we're making fun of the studios themselves.
Yeah.
But in a serious way, in a sincere way. It's like if you read an Asylum script, you'd think you were reading a Michael Bay $200 million project.
I can't wait to read the script for Megalodon Rising because I can absolutely see it looking like the Meg's script in a lot of, the plot could be totally different, but the stylized of expectation. I think the point you made is really true is where I came from is, I was not a cool, even though I was a college athlete, I was always a dork or nerd, or, that's who I am. And you kind of looked at it in a way of like, you look at the Asylum and you guys weren't ever trying to be what you weren't.
Right.
And I think a lot of people in the industry took a long time to realize, hey, movies, or maybe I think it's like the early 2000s, maybe 2000 to 2010, movies got really serious and people took it really, really serious. And kind of, you look back the 70s, the 80s, and horror was fun. Horror was campy. Some horror was really good, but you had fun with it. And I really feel like it lost it. I think Blair Witch was a big part of that. I think there was a lot that like horror lost a little bit of the fun for a while, and you guys didn't. And I think it took people a long time, 10 years to really come around to, hey, what they're doing they're not trying to make, The Conjuring here. They're trying to have fun with it. And I think that's where it's really turned around in a lot of ways.
I think that's true. And our movies, they're meant to be enjoyed for what they are, and then you never have to think about them again.
Or watch them 14 times. No judgment.
Either one is acceptable. I remember when Netflix, you might have heard of them.
They're the disc company. They send them to you, I believe.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Well, back in the day when they had discs, I would look at my queue and I realized it was really aspirational. It was, these are the films I should watch, but I never did. At the end of the day, I'd come home from work, tired, crack open a beer and say, I want to watch something that I don't have to think. I'm just going to let it.
I can just be in it.
Exactly. And ultimately that's what our movies are.
I think that's what I really like about them. And Sam jokes about me. I have not seen so many movies I should have seen. I just saw Blair Witch for the first time 3 months ago.
Wow.
We did an episode about it and she asked me why. I'm like, I was watching the movies I wanted to watch and I didn't really care enough at that time. I was watching goofy movies, comedies, horror movies that I loved. It's interesting, the difference between the two of like you said, I feel that way about my Netflix queue right now still. Like I have my wish list is all these things I should see. I'm never going to watch them.
Right. Yeah, it's true. No. It's true.
So what is it like producing? What do you produce? Almost 100 titles, like 2,500 titles a year. I mean, you guys.
It's about 25 a year.
Yeah,
right? It's been about 25 a year for the last few years.
What is the process to putting that together, to producing? Like I said, just because it's my point of reference, we talk with Tom and Lee, and they're like, some of these shoots are 3-5 days, 7 days. It seems like it must be insane.
It is. One of the tricks that we do, and Tom and Lee, of course, are they're veterans of this. That's why they moved on. But one of the tricks is to hire young, new people who don't know that you can't make a movie in 6 days, and it really works.
Ignorance is bliss,
because they figure it out. And sometimes we give them 7 days, and then then it's like magic happens. But one of the things I've said before in other podcasts, and there was one of the things that we have done, and I think it's one of the key things that the Asylum has done, is that we make the genre the star. Whether it's a horror film or a creature film or a Lifetime movie or whatever the case may be, the model is so specific that, and people get mad when I say this, that we almost make our movies director proof. Because we say to the writers and the directors that every 10 pages, either somebody's got to be getting killed or you see a monster or something like that, and that's the model. Don't get me wrong. If there's a great director, the film is exponentially better. But if there's a okay director, it's still pretty good as long as they stick to the model.
Yeah.
And I've written, several of them, and I've always taken that to mind and found that as a writer, it's freeing to know that you've got rules that you work on. Is that you go, okay, every 10 pages, you either, back in the day, you'd see boobs or blood.
Yep.
And it was so freeing because you go, I've got 10 pages to figure out how I'm going to get between those segments. And that's sort of our model. And as long as we stick to the model, the films work.
I think there's a beautiful symmetry in that. As my undergraduate degree was in science. And I think in that way of, I like structure. It's how I've always worked as a human. So when you were saying that, I'm like, that's how I would try to approach a movie. All right, block, 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 versus, because I just think of the idea, when I'm 37 now. When I was 18, I bought one of those books, like How to Write a Movie, Try to Write a Movie. And I remember sitting there and being like, I spent more time trying to format it and stare at the screen and going, I have no idea what to do. I can totally see how like that would have helped me at least be like, okay, I at least have an idea. That structure makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you've done everything with this company. You mentioned you're the chief operating officer. You handle a lot of the finances. That's the cool, fancy title in the business cards. But you have been behind the scenes. You've been writing, producing, directing. What was the best role you've had in that kind of situation? Not that excluding your current one, like you like what you do, obviously. But and then what was the hardest thing for you to do in those kind of roles?
Well, I'll tell you, they're both the same. When I directed Legion of the Dead, which I also wrote, it was the experience of directing film was the purest creative experience I've ever had in my life. Because,
cool.
I think we had 10 days or something like that in those days. And it was from sunrise to sunset. You were just always having to think about what was going to be done and how it was going to work and everything like that. So just from an artistic, satisfying experience, that's probably been the most satisfying. And it's also been the most difficult because the movie just didn't turn out well. I don't beat myself up too hard because I say, but for one thing, back in those days, we were shooting on film.
I was going to say, this is pre-digital.
Yeah, this was pre-digital. And and this is maybe getting really technical, but we used to shoot on short ends, which were leftover film from, studio productions.
Oh, okay.
You might have 30 seconds of film and then you'd have to change the reel. And so when we were making those movies, we would get one, maybe two takes. And so part of me likes to say, well, if I did it today in the digital time, because we, now our movies, they just keep shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting. So I like to tell myself that maybe it would have been a better film. But I'm comfortable saying I think I'm a better writer than I am a director.
So you've seen so many films from start to finish, and you guys have produced so many fascinating different styles. Is there a period of movies from your filmography as a company that gets you most excited to talk about?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think with you, ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm most excited about the creature movies because those are the movies that I loved as a kid. Whether it was the Godzillas or, whatever the case may be.
Black Lagoon and
Exactly. And so just from the standpoint of why I got into this, the creature movies are probably my favorite. I certainly enjoyed, like I said, the sexy comedies as well. Although I can't talk too much about that since a 9-year-old has joined me in the room.
Hey, I totally get it. Your 9-year-old, I appreciate it. I also have guilty pleasures of like watching reality shows and like I've joked about it. My wife's like, you're the one who watches Are You the One in this household? I'm like, you're right. It's where I can shut my brain off and it's hilarious. So I appreciate those just as much. Rom-coms are definitely a guilty pleasure of mine.
but the creatures will always have a special place in my heart. And one of our first Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, which was our Sharknado before Sharknado. It's the first film that sort of got some notice. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we premiered the trailer on MTV.com, which I don't know if it exists anymore. But seeing that and Mega Piranha is another favorite. I think at the heart of it, those are my favorite movies.
Talk about favorite movies just because I know it's the cliched podcast question, but I always talk with Sam of the ones I loved. When you were a kid, you wanted to get into movies. What were the movies that really got you excited? I mean, you talked about creature films, but was there like specific ones that stood out as movies?
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm of the age, I was 13 years old when Star Wars came out. And obviously, was a huge fan of the first three. But then probably around the same time, it's like I think about the Ray Harryhausen films, like those Sinbad movies, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger.
Oh, yeah. Those are so much fun.
In 1977. I mean, I just loved those movies. Land That Time Forgot, which we later did an adaptation of. That's the stuff that made me want to make movies, those types of movies. And I remember as a kid seeing one movie, it was and somebody one time found the movie for me, but all I remember about it was Santa fought Satan.
What? Yes. No, sorry. That's absolutely my wheelhouse. Yeah. I don't need any more than that. I'm in.
Yeah, and you don't. I don't remember what the movie was or anything like that. But how do you beat Santa battling Satan? You can't.
I think that's where movies came for me too. Is I love the simplicity. Jaws is my favorite movie of all time because horrifying creature. And I, as a young kid, I saw it. I was terrified, but I was obsessed with sharks ever since. If I was a more intelligent mathematician, I would totally have been into marine biology, but not.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of what you just said is I think the best movies, in my opinion, it's a podcast, so we do, are ones where it's simple. I think so much tries to do so much nowadays where it gets so convoluted. I always use the example of I enjoyed Inception, but it was a headache to watch because, I want to watch a movie and just kind of be taken away. And when you have to keep track of all the moving parts, sometimes it gets a little bit much.
Yeah, I read something recently and I'd love to give attribution, but I can't remember who said it. But, it's like Jaws and Star Wars were a response to the seriousness of the early 70s of movies that were being made, the Easy Riders and Scorsese.
The Suspirias of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And Spielberg and Lucas said, you know what? We want to go back to when the movies were fun. And I think that's very true. I think, and you can give them a lot of crap about, they dumbed cinema down and, it just became about blockbusters and making millions of dollars. And all of those are legitimate criticisms, but they certainly are fun movies. There's no doubt about that. And I like that a lot.
It's fascinating you say that. And that first thing I think of now is Marvel, the cyclicalness of it, of people are all complaining about, the superhero blockbuster, it's dumbing down cinema. It's like, well, it's fun. Not all of them, but you have fun. You enjoy them. I'll watch Thor Ragnarok all day long. I don't need it to be, There Will Be Blood, which I do adore, but it's, time and place.
My only criticism of the superhero films, and this is something a lot of people don't agree with me, but I'm just adding some controversy to your podcast, is the ideal length for a movie is 90 minutes.
Oh, I'm 100% with you. Yes.
I don't care how much spectacular action is going on. I don't need to see it for 2.5 hours.
I don't even need 2 hours. Sam made me, so speaking of movies I should have seen that I never did, she's making me watch Interview with a Vampire because I wasn't a teenage girl in the 90s. I never saw it. And watching it now, I'm like, yeah, I would have hated this in the 90s. Not a fan now. But I pops up, it's like 2 hours and 2 minutes. And I was just like, oh, don't make me stay more than an hour and a half. Because it's so beautiful to be able to condense them down into that distilled form and get rid of a lot of the waste in some of these long films.
Absolutely. I just read today that the new James Bond movie is almost 3 hours long. And I'm going, you don't need that.
No, I'm a reader too. If I want to spend 3-4 hours in my medium, I'll go there.
Right.
So before I let you go, Paul, Tom Sizemore's been in a lot of your films. What I found really cool lately, and I think it's with the evolution, as you mentioned, of the Asylum's name, is you've been able to pull in not just C and D list, you've been getting Vivica A. Fox, and you've been getting people to play some of these roles. What has kind of evolved in that change? And what has it taken to bring in, or are people coming to you to want to be in some of these films?
Not as much as we would like them to come to us.
Yeah.
But, it comes back to what I was talking about before. Some people get it. They just get it and they go, this is going to be a fun thing. And we love working with those people. I don't know that we've ever had anybody that you could describe as A-list.
You had Danny Trejo, who I would say is pretty close to A-list. Burning Dead. Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. We have had Danny a couple of times. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Some of the shark attacks. Yeah.
Yes.
But talk about someone who gets it in movies.
Well, Danny Trejo is somebody who gets it. I mean, that's the bottom line. And what Danny gets is he gets who he is. And he stays within his wheelhouse of what people expect Danny Trejo to do and to be in a movie. And, he's a pro. We've been lucky to have him a few times.
He's so much fun to watch. He's someone you could put in any role and you're just like, all right, I'm going to enjoy. He and Jason Statham are in my wheelhouse right now of you put him in anything. It doesn't have to be good. I will enjoy watching them decide what they're doing for character choices.
Yeah, it's true. He did a World War II film that we just released recently, and it has 2 titles, so I can't remember which one.
Was that the Rebels of PT 218?
That's the one. Thank you.
I'm gonna pretend I don't have a phone right here, and I just know that off the top of my head, but that's not. The truth.
It was released somewhere else under a different title, which is why I got confused. But when we had the opportunity to have Danny in that film, and at the time there wasn't a part for him, and so we had the writer go back and write, and we go, were there any Mexican American soldiers in the Navy in World War II? And he did the research. And he said yes, there were, and so we rewrote the part so that it could work for Danny, and it was a lot of fun.
How has shooting been with COVID for you guys?
Oh, interesting. We shut when it first happened. We shut down for 2 months. And we thought, well, let's try one. And so we decided to make a movie in Florida because Florida. And we did a shark movie that aired on Tubi called Swim.
I've been meaning to watch that, so I will have to watch that because I've seen that. Yeah.
It's good. And no, I'm sorry, wrong shark movie. We did produce a shark movie called Swim that's on Tubi, but that was not the first one we made. The first one we made was called Shark Season that we did. That one we did in, I think we did it in 5 days. We had a cast of 5, a crew of 8. And it worked out perfectly. There were no problems, no infections,
that's awesome.
Anything like that. And we just started production again in Los Angeles. We're back to our 2 or more a month. And, it's not inexpensive because you have to do additional protocols of testing, everything like that. It's changed things, but it's, it's worked out.
I mean, it's film. I feel like you guys are used to dealing with challenges and changes and the unexpected. So you've had so much success with movies, but you've also had Z Nation, which is it's a show. What has been the different experience putting that together versus, like we say, your movies are usually 3 to 7, 3 to 10 days. I imagine that's a bigger experience.
It is a bigger experience, but in a way it's not because the television schedule is really fast. And so we would be shooting in 6 to 7 days an episode.
Oh, wow.
And so in a way it was like, well, this is easy. You only have to do 45 minutes in 6 to 7 days. This is great. And so in that way, the experience we've had making our movies and the way we make our movies made that very, it was an easy match for that.
Yeah, it sounds like a natural kind of transition. As you're saying, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. You're just shooting, 12 small movies per season.
Exactly. And to your question that you asked earlier that I didn't answer, but will now, is I think what's next for the Asylum and our goal is to do more television series. I think writing is on the wall, that shorter form, and I'm not talking about 10-minute YouTube films, but shorter content is really where the industry is going. I mean, Sci-Fi Channel maybe makes 3 to 5 movies a year now.
They've really cut back. Yeah.
They really cut them back. And so now it's, there's Lifetime and there's Hallmark, and that's kind of it as far as TV movies are concerned. And so the Asylum is really focusing on trying to do a lot more series.
Oh, that'll be exciting.
I hope so.
My last question, I kind of like to ask this about everyone. So what do you consider? So we talk about B movies, and you might be the perfect person to ask this. What is a B movie to you?
Well, I'd just be repeating myself, but to me, a B movie is a movie that has a lower budget, usually produced independently, although not necessarily always. So the studios have released a few B movies.
Ooh, yes, they have.
But I think that, the bottom line is that it comes down to the purpose of them is to entertain. It's not to say that you can't send a message. We try to do that often in our movies, but the key and the primary goal is to just be an entertaining movie. And I think that's what B movies are. You could exchange the term B movie with popcorn movies. It's the same thing.
Right.
You could exchange it with drinking game movies. which many of our movies are.
I would love if you create a film where the whole point was like, all right, how many drinking game plots can we build in here? And then build a script from that. Yeah. And it's not about drinking games. It's just like a zombie film. Yeah.
That's perfect. I love it. I love that.
Drinking of the Dead. Yes. So Paul Bales, COO of the Asylum, absolute delight. Thank you for taking the time. You didn't have to do this. You were so graceful. I'm so appreciative. This is really cool for me, being a big fan of the Asylum.
Well, I appreciate being a fan.
And we'll still be a fan. I can't wait for what's coming next. So there you have it. Paul Bales, everyone. Thanks for listening again this week. You can follow and look up all our information in all our socials. The Asylum is the production company. Again, if I didn't mention it enough in this episode, adore them dearly. We're actually going to be doing one of their films this Thursday. So in a few days, you get to hear us talk about a film Paul mentioned, Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus. Let's just say there's a shark, the Golden Gate Bridge, an airplane, an octopus, submarines. Deborah Gibson. You can't wait to hear it. We look forward to your feedback as always. Thanks for listening. In the words of Sam, bye.